Every time I think about Bitcoin, I get really nervous that we're running out of time, certainly for the company to buy Bitcoin. We want to buy as much Bitcoin as we can before the price goes up. I actually think it's a great thing that the price is weak now.
Totally.
If Bitcoin was
Every
at $1 million
pullback.
now, then you might feel like you've missed it. Although I think $1 million is still cheap in the long term.
Welcome back to the show. I'm so excited to have with me today Simon Gerovich, the founder and CEO of Metaplanet, the success story of Bitcoin in the last year. Thank you so much for joining me. This is your first interview.
It is my first podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
I love that. Thank you so much. I feel honored. And I can't wait to learn more about the company. So why don't we just talk a little bit about the backstory of Metaplanet and how it came to this very lucrative decision to adopt Bitcoin?
Well, we started the company really as a hotel company. I founded a hotel business back in 2010. We were a Pan-Asian budget hotel platform, had hotels in Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia, and Japan. It was an extremely exciting journey for the better part of, I suppose, 18, 19 years until the middle of COVID. COVID was something that affected the hospitality industry in a terrible way. Most of our markets, we were forcibly closed. And we were faced with the decision to make in 2020. And I like to share this story. I shared it earlier today on Bitcoin Investor Week. But I was sitting at home, couldn't go to the office, listening to podcasts, just like this one. And I heard Michael Saylor talk about his inspiration, the struggles that he went through to kind of decide whether or not to adopt a Bitcoin strategy. And he, I guess, went through quite a process investigating different types of investments to make with the cash that he had, and ultimately ended up in the right place, a place that many Bitcoin treasury companies, and I'd love to talk more about what that is as a category, because I think it's something which will be in a very important category of companies going forward. And MicroStrategy has effectively laid out a very clear game plan for companies around the world to follow, but they really haven't done that until I think this year, or actually end of last year, into this year.
Were you in a situation where you had a large cash balance and you felt just like Michael Saylor did, that it was a melting ice cube, and you decided to essentially study Bitcoin and take the risk? I'm assuming you had to do some due diligence in order to convince everyone to go on board with you, right? What was that process like?
We were actually sort of lucky in the sense that the company was struggling during COVID, and I think our board and shareholders were desperate for us to find something new. So many people, they talk about, is it difficult for an operating business that's successful to pivot into Bitcoin? It probably is, because then they'd be diverting attention and resources away from something that's already going well. In our case, I suppose can proudly say that we were a zombie company, so prime for something new. We didn't have lots of cash, but we did have hotel assets. And so as part of the decision of pivoting into Bitcoin, we decided to sell everything, save for one hotel. We still have one hotel in Tokyo. We've got some exciting plans for it. But we took that cash and we bought our first Bitcoin. We did do an initial capital raising round, brought in a lot of kind of like-minded individuals who believe that Bitcoin, is something, and a Bitcoin treasury strategy would be something that's worth pursuing. I think we were lucky in the sense that we maybe had no other choice. And so everyone was supportive of this pivot. And then almost immediately after we announced that we bought our first Bitcoin, the excitement from the market was incredible. We're very humbled by that reaction, particularly from the Japanese retail investor base.
Wow. Coin Stories is brought to you by Genius Group, a Bitcoin treasury company listed on NYSE American, ticker GNS. Genius is on its way to hodling 1,000 Bitcoin in its treasury while educating the world on a Bitcoin-first future. Genius is also launching the Bitcoin Academy with courses from the likes of Saifedean Ammous, author of the Bitcoin Standard. Join the launch waitlist via the QR code on the screen or the link in my show notes and receive the weekly Bitcoin Treasury newsletter, plus a chance to win a whale pass to Bitcoin 2025 in Vegas this May. Genius Group. Genius isn't measured in IQ, it's measured in Bitcoin. Coin Stories is also brought to you by Bitdeer, a global leader in disruptive technology for Bitcoin mining and high-performance computing for AI. As a publicly traded leader, Bitdeer boasts a massive 2.5 gigawatts of electrical capacity and infrastructure across 3 continents, positioning Bitdeer as one of the most diversified and power-dense computing companies in the world. Learn more at bitdeer.com. All right, back to the show. No, it's really incredible. I mean, as soon as a company decides to pivot, it seems like it just brings a wave of attention, and your market cap 100x'd in the last year, right? And your share price went from what to what?
It was about a $13 million market cap before we announced everything, and now we're about 1.2 billion in that neighborhood. So it's been incredible, but it's easy to say 100x if you start from a very low base.
Sure.
I hope we can continue to perform this year. Our stock is incredibly volatile, but like Saylor likes to say, volatility is vitality,
Mhm.
and I 100% believe in that. I started my career actually as a derivatives trader
Oh,
at
wow.
Goldman,
Oh, wow.
and so volatility is something that I crave. It isn't for everyone, but I think the worst thing that a CEO can be faced with is a company that no one has interest in, that trades no volume, where the stock barely moves.
Right.
Moving volatility, that's the energy which a
Mhm.
company needs.
Right, and that's what Michael talks about too, that digital energy that can boost, especially the zombie companies. We recently saw, I think, Eric Semler come out with the Zombie Zone, identifying
Yes.
opportunities in the space. So I'm assuming more company leaders, CEOs, are they coming to you now and they're asking you how to do this themselves?
Quite a few are actually reaching out. It's again very humbling. We've been inspired by Michael Saylor and the great work that he's done, and it's very nice that companies are now reaching out to us, particularly those in Asia, wanting to understand our strategy. So we feel there's a moral obligation really to pass on that information, the learnings that we've had, the war stories that we've had, and hopefully inspire a lot more public companies around the globe to adopt Bitcoin.
Are there any challenges leading a company that adopts Bitcoin because it is so volatile, because it still feels like it's not institutionally adopted to the level that it should be?
I'm reminded of a conversation that I had with a friend in Japan, also a CEO of a public company, and sitting over lunch, trying to convince him that this is something worth doing, showing our positive stock price performance, and
Yeah.
saying this is something that could be transformational for you as well. The difference is he has a successful business that generates a lot of cash. There's a ton of cash sitting on the balance sheet, which is decaying in value sort of every day. But I think his concern, and this may be the concern for other companies that have core businesses that are working,
Mhm.
it's too much of a risk for them. People have invested in their company with a particular strategy in mind. So for them to suddenly make a pivot like this may not be well received by many of their long-term investors. So as a CEO, you're thinking, do I try something new? Do I risk alienating our existing core shareholder base? So again, I think it's the zombie companies that find it easier.
Mhm.
Companies that have a relatively small current business that realize that plugging into the Bitcoin network is something that can really bring a lot more attention to them. Bitcoin has a lot of eyeballs on it right now.
Mhm.
So you get free marketing
Yes.
by getting involved in Bitcoin. But I think what's important is that if you're doing a Bitcoin treasury strategy, to actually believe in Bitcoin
Mhm.
and not necessarily use this as some kind of ploy or ruse
Right.
to pump your share price.
Right. Don't
It,
orange wash the company.
right.
Yeah.
You need to be really focused on this. You need to believe in this, and be really disciplined. Ignore the volatility. Every time Bitcoin falls is really an opportunity to buy more.
Right.
It's a gift.
That's right. Do you think that companies are going to pivot to do things like strategy where they're only focused on actually Bitcoin, or do they use Bitcoin to supplement whatever industry that they're in to be a better company, to serve their customers better? In your example, like to expand the hospitality, maybe offer more hotels. I mean, how do you see that playing out? Because it seems like strategy is just totally going in the direction of Bitcoin.
Yeah, we very much believe in Bitcoin as well. We're a Bitcoin first, Bitcoin only company. A few of the copycats, sort of in recent months, have a more generalist approach.
Hmm.
So they'll buy a whole portfolio of digital assets, Bitcoin being one of them. And I think that's maybe a desire to to differentiate from those that just buy Bitcoin. I think that's a terrible strategy personally. And I think in recent weeks and months, we've seen that Bitcoin is the one that holds up the most in times of volatility. But it does make sense, I think, for certain industries to embrace Bitcoin and see how they can incorporate that into what they do. We're no longer a hospitality player, and we have one hotel, and our
Mhm.
plan actually is to convert that into the Bitcoin hotel.
Really? Is this
That
public?
it is public, and
Oh,
we're going to reopen the hotel at the end of the
amazing.
year. Really have it be a place for Bitcoiners around the world to come and meet each other, learn about the history of Bitcoin. We'll have a Bitcoin museum, a Bitcoin art gallery.
Wow.
So one of the things is, if you're an artist creating art on Bitcoin, then we want to give you a space in the hotel to display your work. Um, but
So you're
yeah,
pivoting to Bitcoin fully too.
oh, absolutely, 100%.
Wow. So this is interesting because it seems like a lot of companies might at first use Bitcoin as sort of that store of value to boost their capital to be able to continue their operations in whatever they're doing. And others are just going to turn into different Bitcoin companies, essentially.
Yeah, and it's really exciting, isn't it? There's so
Yeah.
much potential.
What do you think is the next catalyst that will get some of the massive big public companies that aren't the zombies, right? The Googles, the Metas, the big magnificent sevens to all be Bitcoin holders?
I think it's a really tough one. I know that Saylor has been doing a lot of work there, speaking to boards, convincing them
Yeah.
that Bitcoin is something worth considering. Um, but again, I think back to my earlier point, for them, if they have a successful core business, to make that pivot requires a few more steps.
Mhm.
They may have shareholders that don't want exposure to Bitcoin. If they want exposure to Bitcoin, they can buy it directly. They can buy the ETF. They can buy a Bitcoin treasury company.
Right.
But why would they buy Google or Facebook? They're buying it, for the reasons that they exist.
Yeah.
So hopefully, over time, those CEOs realize if they have a lot of cash, just having it sit there, decaying isn't the most responsible thing to do.
Mhm.
But they may be the last to come and buy, but they'll buy at the price they deserve. And I think right now, what's more important is getting the average person, the retail investor, getting them involved in Bitcoin, not having them pay the high price of the future, onboarding them now at a time where I think the price is still very reasonable, and then the governments and the large corporations, they can then buy it once everyone have their bags full.
So you're really a Bitcoin pioneer in Japan, and I'd love to learn just a little bit more about the country's adoption, because I haven't heard a lot about Japan and Bitcoiners there. That it's not truly a hub. Really, whenever I hear about Japan and Bitcoin, I hear about Metaplanet. So can you talk to me about maybe just retail adoption and adoption of Bitcoin in general in your country?
Sure. You know, Japan was actually at the forefront of Bitcoin in the early days.
Really?
All of the meetups were there. Roger Ver was living in Japan and orange pilling people at that time. CZ was there as well, living and working in Japan. Mount Gox
Mhm.
was
Yeah.
what I think put a spanner in the works.
Mm.
If it wasn't for Mount Gox, I think Japan would definitely still be a leader. But I'm very optimistic that Japan will roar back. It's an amazing place. People are very tech focused. There are a whole generation of young Japanese that are looking for interesting new kind of asset classes to invest in. And I think the challenge in Japan is that it's not so easy to buy Bitcoin. There are plenty of exchanges, but just the process of going from deciding I want to buy Bitcoin to actually owning your first Bitcoin, it takes time. It takes time to identify the exchange that you would like to buy your Bitcoin on. The account opening process is rather arduous. They have this unique system in Japan where they have to verify your address by physical mail. And so
Really?
you'll apply to open the account, and then a postcard comes in the mail. They know if it's been received, it's registered mail, and only then
Wow.
do they know that you live where you're supposed to live. Um,
Hmm.
and so what we discovered, I think we kind of fell into it, looking on web boards in Japan and looking on X. People were commenting that wow, this is a really good way to get exposure to Bitcoin. Buying Metaplanet was a really good way to get exposure to Bitcoin. The taxation in Japan um, is extraordinarily high. It's the highest in the world on digital asset capital gains.
Oh, what is it?
It's 55%.
Wow.
No other country is that high. And so it has to
That's
change.
terrible.
And so if you're a retail investor and you want to get exposure to Bitcoin, knowing that you could buy stocks in the stock market and pay only 20% versus buying Bitcoin, you kind of make the decision, let me just buy a volatile stock that maybe gives me the same kind of upside exposure. There's also a new retirement program called the NISA, and you can buy stocks up to a certain amount of money. I think it's about $20,000 a year, and then you pay no capital gains tax.
Oh, interesting.
And so right now, Metaplanet, if you want exposure to Bitcoin, buying our stock is the most tax efficient way to get exposure to Bitcoin in a leveraged manner versus anything else.
And you've outperformed Bitcoin.
We've outperformed Bitcoin. We want to outperform Bitcoin. That's our KPI effectively.
This episode is brought to you by Casa, the leader in Bitcoin self-custody solutions, helping people like me secure their wealth with simple, powerful multi-key vaults. And now Casa is here to help businesses and governments do the same. Introducing Casa Business, a secure, easy-to-use 3-key vault designed specifically for small businesses with team signing capabilities and a web dashboard. Regardless of the size of your business, start your Bitcoin treasury the secure way. Take control and protect your assets. Get 10% off your Casa plan at casa.io/Natalie. Next up, Speed, the fastest growing Lightning wallet in the world and my preferred way to send and receive sats. You can use Speed to buy Bitcoin, swap with stablecoins like Tether, and snag gift cards to earn rewards, all in seconds. Download Speed via the QR code or the link in my show notes. Use code COINSTORIES10 for 5,000 free sats. Are you ready to take control of your wealth, your Bitcoin, and your online privacy? The Bitcoin Way is here to empower you. Learn to take full self-custody and eliminate all counterparty risk. Learn how to set up and run your own node, and upgrade your cybersecurity and build a fortress of privacy around your online activities and your Bitcoin. The Bitcoin Way specializes in personalized one-on-one training. Schedule your free consultation at thebitcoinway.com/Natalie. And finally, CoinKite, the one-stop shop for all your Bitcoin self-custody needs. Their flagship cold card wallet is the go-to for cold storage. Protect your Bitcoin like a pro. Visit their site and grab 5% off with promo code CoinStories. All right, back to the show. So do a lot of people in Japan invest in equities, or how do people save?
Well, Japan actually has the greatest amount of so-called household savings. There's almost $10 trillion of cash sitting in personal bank accounts earning zero. And so Japan has always been known to be a country of savers. I wonder if it's because for a long time after the bubble burst in the late 80s, asset prices have just declined in value. So people have just thought holding cash is the best thing. But more and more people are now looking at other ways to deploy their capital. People aren't risk takers like they are in the States. They're much more conservative. But yeah, I think over time now, the younger generation, definitely, they don't want to see their, they don't want to earn 0.1% interest in the bank. They want to be able to make a lot more money and invest and be able to travel and do all the things that they see others do around the world.
Is there anything you want to share just about the monetary policy side? I mean, central banking, even though the Federal Reserve is sort of the central bank for the world, there are these other powerful central banks that we hear about, the Bank of Japan and the quantitative easing and the suppression of interest rates and all of that. I mean, is there anything that you want to share with people about your thoughts of this whole system that we're currently in?
Yeah, it's it's a system right now that's really untenable. Every country has the ability to print their own currency without any second thought. And I think as one country does that, every country feels empowered to do so themselves. And they realize they have no choice. It's a really simple path for a government just to decide to increase the money supply. They can use that money to kickstart the economy. And in the short term, it may be impactful, but over the long term, it just appreciates the value of the currency. And so I suppose one has to be somewhat, sensitive. I know in the US that people like to attack the government and attack the Fed.
They're calling for end the Fed.
Yep. Whereas I think maybe in Asia there is a feeling that the tools available aren't as prevalent. The U.S. has this extraordinary, place in the world where they can print the dollar, but the dollar doesn't weaken because it is the global reserve currency. If a smaller nation, Zimbabwe, wants to print their local currency, then inflation goes to 1,000,000%, their currency is worth nothing. Japan is a global nation, so the yen, does have value. It's an extraordinarily strong economy, I think, at the base layer.
Mm-hmm.
But they're also printing yen like there's no tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Japan is the most indebted
Mm-hmm.
nation as a percentage of GDP. So I think Japan as well needs to find a path forward. And so my hope is that if the U.S. does adopt a strategic Bitcoin reserve,
Mm-hmm.
that will inspire a lot of its very strong allies like Japan, perhaps to do the same. And I would love Metaplanet to kind of play a role in some of those policy discussions.
Yeah.
And that would be really exciting, for us to be part of.
Do you see that happening in the near future, a strategic Bitcoin reserve?
You're probably better placed than I am with all the wonderful speakers on your podcast to comment on that. I'd be surprised if there isn't one. There's been obviously a lot of talk of such a reserve. I was in Nashville last summer for the Bitcoin conference, in the crowd when President Trump spoke, and assured the world and the American public
Yeah.
that something would be coming.
Mm-hmm.
So I think everyone's just patiently watching now.
Yeah, I do think that we're going to get a stockpile and we're going to sort of just move over the Bitcoin we already have from civil forfeitures and all that
Mhm.
and allocate it to, I guess, the treasury, and that'll be the stockpile. But
Yes.
I guess I'm not as bullish on us buying it just yet, but I hope so. I really do.
Yeah, there's been a lot of built-in expectations.
Can you share just more about your background? If this is the first time they're hearing from you and they just want to know a little bit more about where you come from. You said you were
Sure.
at Goldman Sachs before. Are you originally from Japan?
No, I'm not actually. So I'm an Australian citizen.
Okay.
My dad's from Australia. My mother's from Taiwan.
Oh, wow.
My father was a diplomat, and so we lived in lots of different places,
Mhm.
mainly in Asia. My father was an East Asia specialist. And so we lived in Tokyo. That's when our family kind of fell in love with Japan in the late 80s.
Oh.
Japan was number one at that time. Everyone thought that Japan would become the largest economy in the world. Then in 89, 90, the bubble
Mhm.
burst. And then Japan's been in a bit of a decline since then. But in recent years, I think Japan has now reached that bottom and beginning to grow. Japan's a wonderful place, and everyone who's visited there absolutely loves it, myself included.
Did the bubble burst impact you and your family?
Nope. It was my father that was then posted to the next
Okay.
place. So after Japan, we went back to Australia for a
Mm.
couple of years. Then we moved to Beijing. I went to high school in Beijing,
Wow.
which was an exciting time to be there. And then after Beijing, I went to college here in the U.S., went to Harvard.
Wow.
And then after 4 years of that, decided I wanted to move back to Japan and make Japan my career, and joined Goldman at that time as a derivatives trader.
Hmm.
And so my love for finance and volatility kind of began then. And I guess 5 years into Goldman, decided I wanted to become an entrepreneur, moved to Thailand, and ended up, I guess,
Wow.
falling into real estate. And that's when, together with some partners, we started a hotel business.
The hotel business seems amazing, but very difficult. And you see a lot of smaller hotels getting gobbled up by the big chains. And I kind of now associate that with the problems of fiat, right? I mean, every company is just trying to beat the cost of capital, the hurdle rate, the monetary inflation. And you end up having a lot of these companies getting acquired. And I think that fiat actually leads to monopolies. Do you agree?
Absolutely. In retrospect, I think entering into the hotel space was the biggest mistake. Hospitality is an industry that a lot of people want to dabble in, and there's some significant players with a lot more capital
Mm.
that are able to succeed. And when you're in a capital-intensive business, it's impossible really to outperform.
Mhm.
And so the great thing about Bitcoin again is by plugging into this apex monetary network, you don't need that many people to be able to build a sustainable business. We had almost 1,000 staff before in 4 different countries, and just the minutia of all the different things that you had to do. Speak to the owners of the real estate, the landlord if you're leasing land, the toilet paper supplier, the shampoo supplier, and all that stuff that all the moving parts, which are incredibly complex. But it was definitely a journey I had to go on. I think it's made me better for it, and having the war stories means that you know what to do in times of difficulty. But I'm very grateful to Bitcoin. I'm very grateful for being now being part of this industry, and I'm incredibly excited for the future.
Talk to me about your personal Bitcoin journey. Did you get there pretty quickly? I mean, if you were watching Michael Saylor, was it pretty much like, okay, I get it? Or did it take you a while and maybe you had challenges with some aspects of Bitcoin that could help some people that are viewing this?
Sure. I mean, I first discovered Bitcoin back in 2012 in Japan, and so
All the way back
I
then.
bought Bitcoin on Mount Gox and I lost it all,
Oh,
and so it wasn't the best foray
yeah.
into Bitcoin. Sometimes I wish that I had a friend like me telling them about Bitcoin, because if I had that back then, I went to a few meetups, but it was all very esoteric. It was too high level and it was too conceptual. I sort of got it, but if I had someone, a friend, if Michael Saylor was there at that meetup, I would definitely have gone all in at that time. Um, but I think it's about studying. Most people, I think, are a little bit lazy. They're short term focused. They
Mhm.
want to buy something that can immediately go up 100x, which is why now everyone's looking at the next shiny coin. What's
Right.
the next Bitcoin?
Yeah.
There's no next Bitcoin, right? The chance of another Bitcoin coming about is just absolutely impossible. And so other coins may have a use case. They may outperform Bitcoin in the short term, but long term, I think there's nothing besides Bitcoin that will be a long term store of value. Coming from a financial background, I think I got it faster maybe than others who
Mhm.
may not be in finance.
Yeah.
Just understanding, how the money supply, how
Mhm.
inflation works, how there is a limited supply with Bitcoin.
Mhm.
Every time I think about Bitcoin, I get really nervous that we're running out of time. Certainly for the company to buy Bitcoin, we want to buy as much Bitcoin as we can before the price goes up. I
Right.
actually think it's a great thing that the price is weak now. It is a gift. If
Totally.
Bitcoin was at
Every
$1 million
pullback.
now, then
Yep.
you might feel like you've missed it. Although I think $1 million is still cheap in the long term.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And it does speak to your open mindedness as someone coming from finance because a lot of TradFi, they just can't see through, I don't know, the forest through the trees and
Yeah.
they're missing Bitcoin still. Where do you forecast the space going? I'm assuming you believe that more and more companies are going to the light bulb's going to go off and they're going to adopt Bitcoin, which will be a huge advantage to companies like yours that are very, very early. But 10 years from now, how do you see the space?
So I'm definitely seeing that Bitcoin treasury company is a category, which will be a big thing going forward. We need to work on helping analysts really value companies like ours. And Sailor's done a really good job of adopting certain KPIs, which we've also now adopted. So BTC
BTC
yield
yield, yeah.
is incredibly important. Yesterday, overnight, we adopted two more KPIs, BTC gain and BTC. Sailor uses dollar gain, we use yen gain.
Okay.
But I think once there are more ways for traditional analysts to really understand how to value a company like ours, they'll start to get it. And so the biggest, I guess, criticism that I hear of the Bitcoin treasury strategy is that it trades at a premium to Bitcoin holdings. So if your market cap is 2x, 3x, 5x the Bitcoin holdings, why would I pay 5 times the price to buy the stock? And I think what they're missing, I guess a good comparison is if you were to value a company like Google,
Mhm.
do you value it based on their NAV, the assets that they have, the desks and the computers that they have? No, you're valuing them based on their ability to generate revenue,
Right.
operating cash flow. They're incredibly profitable, and their stockpile of cash is growing. They should be buying some Bitcoin. But for
Mhm.
companies like ours and Strategy and others, there needs to be a whole sort of different paradigm of tools to value companies like ours. And I think BTC yield is that fundamental KPI. If you can grow your Bitcoin per share over time, then that's incredible value, right? One share is associated with a certain amount of Bitcoin, and then over time, if you can grow that, then that's a really good thing for shareholders. You sit back, you let the company do the work, and you basically have exposure to more and more Bitcoin.
Is it accurate that you are the best performing stock of all of them?
Only in the last 12 months because we've come from
That's
a very low
wild.
base. And so I think how we perform this year is even more critical because now we're a billion
Sure.
plus dollar company,
Sure.
and I do hope we can continue to follow in the footsteps of the bigger players out there. And
Yeah.
um,
And I'm assuming you don't have like a stacking goal. You're just going to keep going and acquire as many Bitcoin as possible.
yeah, my short term goal is to reach 10,000 Bitcoin this year.
Okay.
So we're now at 2235,
Mm.
where I think I look at Bitcoin treasuries. I like that website to track
Yes,
public company treasuries.
bitcointreasuries.net. Yeah.
And so I think we're number 14 now on that list.
Okay.
And the challenge now is you have to buy a lot more Bitcoin to now steadily go up that list.
Right, you have
But
to spend more for just a little bit of Bitcoin. That's what I find fascinating that in a couple of years, it'll be a big deal if a company announces that they have 1 Bitcoin, don't you?
no, exactly. When it's $10 million of
Yeah.
Bitcoin, then having one is quite valuable.
This is such a bullish conversation. I'm so grateful to get to talk to you. Is there anything else that maybe we didn't cover that you wanna share with viewers and listeners?
I think everyone has a role in helping to increase Bitcoin adoption in the world.
Mhm.
And I know a lot of your viewers are already believers in Bitcoin, but there's a great impact, I think, when you're at a dinner or you're out with friends to talk about Bitcoin. Share with them this amazing, asset class, something that I think can be transformational for them
Mm.
if they adopt early. I tell my friends to put 100% of their net worth into Bitcoin, but perhaps that's
100%?
too far. But to start somewhere, right? Everyone can invest 1, 2, 3, 5%. But that means that 95% that isn't invested in Bitcoin is in something that I think is inferior. But I think we can all play a very important role in orange pilling those around us. And one by one, I think the dominoes will fall. We're beginning to see that now, which is incredibly exciting. It's no longer a fringe asset. It's something that's definitely mainstream. And when Wall Street begins to embrace Bitcoin, that's a really good sign.
So does this mean you're personally 100% in Bitcoin?
I just sold an apartment in Tokyo to buy Bitcoin.
No way.
I still have an apartment in Bangkok, which I'm looking to sell. If I can sell it, that goes into Bitcoin as well.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Well, it's been fascinating, Simon. It's so nice to meet you in person. Congratulations on all the success of Metaplanet. I'm sure this is just the beginning of the road for you. So thank you.
No, thank you so much. Thank you for having me on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much for checking out this episode of Coin Stories. Make sure you're subscribed to the show so you don't miss any new episodes. If you can, turn on those notifications and leave us a positive review. It really helps the show grow organically with new listeners. We have a free weekly newsletter. You can sign up at thenewsblock.substack.com. And remember, this show is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing should constitute as official investment advice, and you should always do your own research. I'm always open to feedback and guest suggestions, so please feel free to reach out at info@talkingbitcoin.com. I'll see you next time.